Hey folks, Matt Lange here, and I'm going to be showing you a few of my favorite tricks on how I like to use Get Good Drums. This is not a tutorial on how to make a realistic sounding drum beat. Misha, who is of course one of the founders of Get Good Drums, he just had his masterclass come out that really details explicitly that, and I'm not going to do that. He is far better at that than I am. But I like to use this in a pretty creative way, and let me show you a few of my tricks. So let's just dive right in. So the first thing I want to talk about is using Get Good Drums to kind of make a break beat that we're ultimately going to resample. And so it doesn't matter about having it be perfect, because really I'm just going to make a loop and then I'm going to cut it all up, I'm going to print it, and then rearrange it. So this is my basic beat without any other plugins. This is just Get Good Drums, and I am using the Get Good Drums Periphery 4 kit. It sounds like this. And that's my MIDI. And something I really do like about Get Good Drums is, of course, the ghost notes are really quite nice, which is not surprising also because Matt Halpern, who is one of the other co-founders of Get Good Drums, he's of course the drummer in Periphery, he uses a lot of ghost notes. It would make sense that the ghost notes would be solid, and they are. So that's my beat, and the first thing I'm going to do to it, because I just want to process the hell out of it, because I want this to sound like it's a very, almost something I'm going to like sample off a vinyl record. So first thing I'm going to do is just add some EQ, and what I'm doing, I'm just using the API in Slate, and I'm bumping the high end by quite a fair amount. It's about 6 dB at 10K, taking out a little bit of low mids, adding a little bit more high mids, and then bumping the low end just a touch. Without it, it sounds like this. With it, it sounds like this. So it just, just makes it a little bit more wide sounding, like I guess frequency spectrum wide. And then I'm going to add a compressor, and this is going to completely alter the sound entirely. This is the Eventide Omnipressor, which is amazing. And it's just going to destroy this signal, but in a way that's going to sound beautiful. And you really need good source material for this to work really well. And the Get Good Drum stuff is really good source material. So this plus Omnipressor now sounds like this. Without the presser, with the presser. So that's a huge, huge change. And then at the very end, I'm just putting a Waves tape emulator on here. It just rolls off the high end just a little bit. We could have used vinyl. I just chose with tape for no reason, then it was purely arbitrary. But this is all really just like kind of the basics to really get the sound that we're ultimately going to cut up. So with the vinyl, it sounds like this, or with the tape, I'm sorry. Without it, with it. Now, the only other thing of note, which is really important when it comes to Get Good Drums, and this is something that's very helpful, is that you actually have control over the envelopes for individual microphones, not even just the drums themselves, but the individual microphones. So for instance, if we look at my kick, you're going to see that I have the envelope enabled for both the actual kick mic itself as well as the room. So let's just, let's just solo the kick itself. Here's without any envelope. So you can hear there's a lot of boominess going on in there. So turning on the envelope, I'm actually able to now control the decay of that microphone itself. So now it's much snappier, which is something I'm ultimately going to want to do because I want this to be as clean as possible. I mean, I want to compress the living hell out of it and make it noisy, but I want the noise, like the source material going into the compressor to be nice and tight because I also don't want that extra low end actually like re-triggering the compressor or just kind of getting in the way. So the envelope here is really handy. And what you can see, it's basically an attack, hold, and decay, A, H, and D. And if I had hold all the way up, it holds it. All the way down, short. And decay, as you can see, it can get very short. So I found my happy place right about there. And ultimately, this thing's going to get pitched up, and that's also going to shorten the sound, or shorten really everything, because We're gonna do old school, like Verispeed style, so everything's gonna get faster as you turn up the pitch itself. But I did the same thing also on the room mic here, and this is why, without the room mic, it sounds like this. It's big, just tightens it up. So that's really handy, and it's a great little feature that Get Good Drums has, especially per microphone, which is pretty cool. And I'm a big fan of also how you do have, that noise is coming from all the compression at the end of that sample. It's a lot of compression and some clipping. But it's really nice that you have like every individual drum or cymbal, so to speak. You have all the individual mics for each one, which is really nice. And you can also do the envelopes for everything too. So that makes this very, very versatile. So that all being said, now I'm just gonna render this down, and because I'm in Pro Tools, I'm just gonna hit commit, but you can do it with whatever you want. The nice thing is my noise went away. So here we go. Now the first thing I want to do, I want to make this, I'm going to pitch it up. So I'm just going to use old school pitch shifting, and let's see how three semitones sounds. Maybe 4. If you want to be ridiculous, here's a whole octave. And that sounds like drum and bass, and that's ultimately the tempo I'm going to get to. But for the sake of this, let's maybe go back down to 4. I think that sounded pretty good. All right, so I'm just going to render that down. Good old audio suite. And as you can see, the waveform itself now, it's quite a bit faster than it was before. So let's change our tempo. We're at 86. I mean, 80, we could do 172. It's just a subdivision, but just to make it easier to look at, I'm going to change it to 172. And now I'm just going to actually manually pull this stuff because I want to slice it anyway, because I'm going to be rearranging things theoretically. So I'm manually just going to pull things over. And remember, most of these things are on eighth notes. There are a couple 16th little fills, but for the most part, we're always going to be coming back to eighth notes. It's just important mentally when you're figuring out where things are, but I can tell this little ghost note, that belongs on the 16th, and this belongs right there on the downbeat, and then this is going to be on the 8th note. And one more. Oh, 2 more. I lied. It's nice and tight. Doesn't need to be perfect. And you know what? Let's just for the actually we want that too because it has that nice open hi-hat. Okay. So now that it's cut up, it sounds like this at this tempo. So I'm just gonna get rid of the other one, and I'm gonna duplicate this channel into, say, let's say well, I've got a kick, I've got a hat, and I've got a snare. So really I only need 2 duplicates. That'll make a total of 3 channels. Because now I want to be able to actually like separate all these all together. So I'm going to take my hi-hats, put those down there, put my snare right there. That's a hat, that's a ghost snare, and that should be a hat. That's a hat. Kicks right there, snare. And this, once again, is, what is that? That is a hat. I mean, it's got some snare tail in it, but it doesn't matter. And then that's going to be our kick with the big open hat on it. So now I can really go and I can just kind of sculpt these things individually. So on the snare, for instance, let's just solo that. I'm just gonna take out a little bit of the low end, add a little bit of high end. I mean, it's got a little bit of roominess in it that, you know, I could get rid of, but it's not super bothering me. Like that stuff. Really, what's more critical to me is the cymbals, because that's going to have a lot of low stuff we don't need at all. We could even add a little bit more. And let's look at the kick real quick. It's pretty good already. Let's take out some of that mid stuff. And now you put it together. It sounds like this. So that's a little drum bass beat. So, oops, let's not get rid of that. Let's just do a couple little rearrangements real quick. So let's take that snare there, and we'll put another kick there. And let's fill that in with this tail end there. And that should sound pretty okay. And why not? Let's make one more variation. And this time around, I'm just going to move the snare a little bit. Let's find one of those ghost snares. Yeah, let's take that and put that right at the end there. And then put a little roll right into it. And should we do one other thing on the kick? Why not? As you can see, I'm just kind of figuring this out as I go. But I think this will be interesting. Well, aside from the fact that that should be a kick and not a snare, but I kind of didn't mind it, to be honest. Put that kick there. And we could even put a little ghost snare right in there. And it's going to sound cutty and weird, and that's kind of cool. So that is how I would use Get Good Drums to make a breakbeat that I later cut up and resample. And then if I really wanted to, I could make the snares even tighter, and even, like, you could just even do it with like audio editing, just with fades or something like that, and just say, I want to add a fade of, say, 50 milliseconds, and that would tighten it already. Or let's make it, you know, really tight. Let's say 80, and that will tighten up everything. And let's do that also with the hats. So that's it, but it's really helpful to have great source material, because you need good source material to do this with, and that's where Get Good Drums comes in handy, because even though these are drums, really, I mean, it's a Periphery 4 kit. This came from the making of the Periphery 4 record, which is, you know, just for this lack of being super specific, it's a pretty metal record. So these drums are, you know, really metal drums, but you can process them and turn them into something unique that is very not metal. And that's great, but they're just beautifully recorded and they sound awesome. So now I'm going to show you a different trick that I like to do with Get Good. And this is how I did a lot of the beats actually on my last record, Isolated, where they started off kind of acoustic, but they ended up being very atmospheric. So it started off here, and I'm just once again going to be recreating this on the fly, and it's just totally improvisational. If it's cool, it's cool. If it's not, well, I tried. So here I am using there's another one of the Get Good kits. This is the One Kit Wonders, which are kind of simplified kits, and this one happens to be in partnership with the band Architects. And I just think Architects has amazing drum sounds. You should listen to their last album because it's phenomenal. But probably actually my favorite like rock metal record of 2021. Yes, that's correct. So it's a much more simplified kit. You don't get all the mixer settings that you would get in, say, the flagship GGG Periphery 4 kit, but it sounds really good. And for instance, like my snare is this. It does sound different than the other kit, but you have a lot less control. Like for instance, you don't have the envelope control or anything like that. This is very much more just like plug and play. You pull it up, you hit some stuff. And while it does have a very basic mixer section, and you can do a little bit of mixing, it's still, for the most part, much more simplified compared to the flagship. But the sounds are great, and that's the most important thing. So what I've done here, I've just programmed another beat, and this is just not something, again, that would necessarily have to be played in real life. I'm creating source material, and this is what that sounds like. Right? Like it's kind of dumb, but it doesn't matter. I added then some processing to it, and this time, once again, I added, it's I've got basically the same EQ that I had on the other one, but this time I'm using a distress, or the FG stress distressor, as my compressor, and then I'm just adding a little bit of saturation at the end, really just to stop the thing from clipping. But now with the processing, it sounds like this. Without. So that's that. So just like before, I'm going to render this down. And this one is a lot easier to see, obviously, where the transients are. So let's just slice everything up real quick. And once again, I'm going to create all these various duplicates of tracks, but for very different reasons this time around. So let me just make this a little bit bigger because I'm missing the little ghost notes. Yep, that's a note right there. Okay. Now I'm gonna make a lot. Let's start with 5. And the reason being is, whereas before, with like say making a breakbeat, we really just wanted to like chop it up and rearrange it. Now we're gonna be doing much more intense EQing and effects per individual drum. This is what makes something sound like, to me, cinematic and interesting and like evocative. And it starting with these acoustic drum sounds that come from Get Good Drums. So here's my kick. And there are 2 kicks here also. So I'm going to do it with different EQ settings on each one. So on the first one, and I'm also going to move all this stuff further down as well, just to make it easier to preview later. And I'm going to do all with EQ for the most part. Really subby, if you could hear it. And maybe even blow out that low end a little bit more. And we're clipping, but no, we're not. Okay. And on this one around, it's going to be more bandpassed, but not losing all of the low end. Bring up the Q helps a lot. And on the last one, let's dupe that EQ over, but change the EQ setting. We'll fade there. And the nice thing about having these different kind of EQ settings is ultimately we'll be able to drop different drums in here. So for instance, like this little ghost note thing, or that rim shot, I could just drop it onto any of those channels, and then I could still have that kind of EQ setting, but with a different drum sound, which becomes very handy later. So now we have this snare, rim, what have you. This is going to be a different thing again. I'm going to take out more of the low end, and I'm going to bandpass it also. Even though there is a cymbal on top, doesn't really matter. But now I'm going to just drag this down as well. I'm going to put a delay on this rim shot. And what kind of delay? It doesn't really matter. I'm going to say an eighth note. So that should sound like this. Let's do 16th notes, actually. And now we have that. So for this hat, let's just do another kind of bandpassy thing, but let's high pass it very high. Bring up the volume a bit. And on the last one, last channel we have, let's do that same thing, but we're gonna put a, let's put another a delay on it. And this time we'll do a ping pong delay. And I'm just gonna do dotted eighth ping pong, because that's sound that always works great for me. And bring up the low cut, even though there's nothing there, so it's pointless to actually do that. And I'm just going to mute these for the time being. Here's what that all sounds like now. And because now we have that hi-hat, the delayed hi-hat, really, take up a lot of that space, I don't want to necessarily have anything in between there. So what I will do, I'll take these things right here, and I'm going to move these across those little, the other bandpass channels that we had before. So now, once you have that kind of all put together, you get this. I like that more. And now let's do a similar thing here. So we know these two are kicks, right? But this time it's a different, slightly different kick pattern. So you can hear that there's a ghost note. And here's our snare again. And let's just do a variation. So duplicate the channel just again, but this time around, we're going to change the EQ setting a little bit. And we're going to change the delay time itself also. And that's going to become a dotted eighth. And that was kind of cool, actually. That was unintentional. But that's the nice thing. I wanted this big, heavy, tom. Just, I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but that sounds good. Let's just do one other duplicate for this thing. And see, that's a tom. It's not supposed to be, but it could be. Or it doesn't sound like a tom. And let's put a nice big reverb on that. And I'm going to use this B2 for arbitrary reasons purely. And let's take these bits right here. And we can just kind of, I'm not going to say randomly, but we can just spread them across these now channels, like these bandpass and echo channels that we created. So this second half of the beat sounds like this now. And I don't like this there. Let's try it right here. Yeah, I'm good with that. And as you can see, you could keep making variations over and over and over, and that ultimately is what will, make this thing sound like a real percussion suite, so to speak. But it all starts with this Get Good Drums programming, and then just splitting everything up across different channels, and just treating each drum, each channel separately, and adding different effects, different really EQ settings. I mean, really we're treating this as filters, but once you add it all up together, it sounds like this. Let's move that one little ghost note in here. Still didn't get it right. Maybe it's going to be there. So, just for fun, if we really wanted to, we could bring back the GGD kit, and let's just layer it in on top of it. All right, with it layered together, it sounds like this. And I'd probably ultimately end up high passing the acoustic stuff because there's a lot of low end, or acoustic, if you will. There's a lot of low end going on the affected versions, but with taking a high pass filter in there and layering it on top, it's gonna, give it some more life, so to speak. So that's a couple of the ways I like to use Get Good Drums. It's not as traditional, of course, as trying to make them sound like real drums. And once again, if you want to learn a really good, actually, if you want to learn from the master, Misha Mansour of Periphery, he just came out with his master class on how to do his style of drum programming that he uses when they're making Periphery records and Haunted Shores and everything else that he does. And he is the person to learn that from. He does it better than basically anyone that I know. So certainly far better than I do. But this is how I do it, and it's an alternative way of looking at it. And the Get Good Drum stuff is phenomenal sounding. I'm fortunate that I have a lot of it, and I've been using it for years. And it comes from great people who make fantastic products, and it's inspiring, and it sounds good. So really, there's nothing else I could ask for from a drum library. So maybe you learned something here and try using a traditional drum library in a non-traditional way. I promise you it's very exciting. And definitely go check out Get Good Drums. Take care.